So welcome everybody to my site. My name is Paul Smyers, and I talk a lot about perception and esoteric psychology and ancient teachings and meditation and so on my site here. And this is one of my series. I'm talking about telepathy, and telepathy in a broad sense is communication with the beyond, with our inner nature, so-called higher self, or the universal mind. And there are patterns and abilities that human beings have, all of us, to basically know our true self in our inner state, in which we are connected to that one universal mind, that infinite consciousness. And telepathy and all forms of insight and all that, inspiration and so on, come from that basic fact that we're all connected. The ancient teaching of consciousness is one, but the forms are many, that we all, our whole being, from the cellular structure, atomic nature, all the way up into a physical body and the complex tool and mechanism that we have as bodies, all of that is connected from top to bottom with that one thread of the universal consciousness. And we are a macrocosm, and you might say a fractal of that universal infinite consciousness. So I'm going to explore this a little bit more here, a little bit about my background. I'm not a so-called expert. I'm not a psychologist. I've been practicing meditation a long time. I present what I'm saying here. Look into it, take advantage of it. Maybe you'll find something useful in it. And if so, please let me know. But I guarantee you, if you listen and follow this, and you'll get some of your own answers within yourself and say, hey, it really makes sense. And I'm going to look into maybe some of these fascinating books, and there's thousands of books out there about this subject. But I wanted to explain a little bit today about the technical aspects of how exchange of information and consciousness works. Okay, we all know that there's a spectrum of vibration in this frequencies in this universe, and there's all different, it's an infinite range. Okay, we see a certain frequency, we hear a certain frequency, and so on. So there are certain limits to our perception, and then there's, like, you can make, say, octaves of things. I mean, people can perceive a little bit more subtle things, a little more subtle things, and that the ancient teachers said that if we train ourselves as human beings by going and taking our attention and putting it within, that we'll find ourselves going to a more refined state of consciousness, which is sensitive to those higher spectrum and lower spectrum, the more subtle and broader range of spectrum perception, that it doesn't, there's mechanisms in our vehicle here that work to perceive these answers that we need to know, but they're not really taught to us in school, and even minimally. Most people grow up and they don't even train their senses very well. So we don't really practice. If you're a musician or something, maybe you use your eyes a lot and you're good at that sort of thing, but oftentimes people go through their whole life with their senses are just kind of basic. They're not really focused or anything. And what I'm talking about here is the expansion of consciousness that is inherent in our own being and allows us to get the answers that we need from within ourselves. And how does that actually work? See, I studied electronics when I was younger, and there's a principle named it's called a carrier wave. For example, let's say you want to broadcast a radio frequency, and let's say 100,000 cycles a second. I believe that's an AM, amplitude modulated frequency. So let's say you want 100,000 cycles a second, and you use that as a carrier wave. The music and so on that you're trying to transmit is not just one frequency. It's like up and down, and maybe if it's in the voice spectrum, it might be up to 20,000, 15,000 cycles a second, or down to 20 or something, but it has a broad range. So what they do is they mix the 100,000 frequency, that's perfect and exact, okay, and they overlay it, they modulate that with the sound that you want to transmit, and then at the receiving end, there's a device that subtracts that carrier frequency and then splits off the sound that you want to hear, or in the case of visual, and then it's separated. So we have a mechanism in our body that can distinguish certain frequencies, and there are certain carrier frequencies in the universe, you might say. There's certain rhythms and sounds that we can get into that are the carrier frequencies of vital information in this universe, okay? And they come from within. Now, within our body, there's like this, you might say the breathing, for example, the breathing frequency. What is the heart frequency? You see, there's a combination of pulses and frequencies in our body that are basically sort of consistent and, within a certain range. And on top of that, there's all kinds of frequencies that we get from through our ears and other senses, and even through our skin and through our feet when we're walking. There's subtle things going on, and there's a whole range of awareness that our subconscious, I call it the superconscious part of our being, that is always like way ahead of us. There's a consciousness within us that inhabits us that we might be aware of about 10% of it or whatever if we're lucky, and then there's a whole realm of subliminal awareness that every one of us has as we go through our life that is picking up information, and information is consciousness. There's an infinite consciousness, and it's just waves around us, and we're living in it, we're participating in it. And when we have our manufactured identity, we have this concept of ourselves, and I am such and such and such, and we look at ourselves in the mirror, and we have sometimes you get a fixed idea about how we're supposed to be. And if that changes, we go get some surgery or something, because it's not supposed to be like that, you see. But there's another part of our being that never changes. It's like, it's the observer, it's the neutral space, it's the omnipresent, just non-local, and that part of it is a fundamental part of it that we can get into to experience. Again, this is about telepathy and about consciousness and about dreams. And how does that happen? Okay, see, so there's a technology that teachers have taught for thousands of years. There's various techniques and so on, and a whole range of them and so on. There's sound techniques and feeling techniques and all kinds of other kinds of ways to expand our awareness, you see. So there's a lot of teaching out there, but not as many people are really curious and get interested and say, wait a minute here, I could learn how to do all kinds of things with my vehicle here, and I can get my own answers. You see, when we have our own answers from within, whatever a book may say, okay, for all the people who, we get information from books, even these books, some of these books are incredible books, and they're inspired, and the language is so eloquent and detailed and specific, and it's like, wow, it conveys a tremendous amount of massive information. A lot of the stuff that we get in books and teaching is just a lot of drivel, you see. So we have to distinguish and filter out to some degree where we get information from, and then we can get into this study of our own awareness. Now, getting back to the subject of telepathy, I want to read you a little book here. I've got one book here that is called Telepathy, and this was inspired by Alice Bailey. This is some of the other books. There's a group of people in the 1900s, early 1900s, and they contacted some sages in India, and they learned some techniques, and they established a way to accurately communicate through various techniques, which itemizes. And there's various kinds of ways where, if you want to convey information from one human being to another in a very detailed, specific manner, what you do is you establish a rapport in a physical way with the person, so that you have a very, very synchronous resonance between the two people. And then in their absence, in their physical absence, you can reestablish that inner communication, and just like bringing our being into a laser type of frequency, where in a laser and light transmission of information, it's the carrier frequency, as I was discussing, is like, it might be like, fiber optics is gigahertz. It's like incredible speed that is transmitting information, and it's carrying information, you see. It's carrying, the sun is a radiating information. It's not just light. There's all kinds of stuff coming off the sun, you see. So all that influence around us, including the earth frequencies and the sun frequencies and all the other things that are going on in this planet, we are in the middle of it, and we have this complex system that can be integrated with that in a very amazing way. And a lot of times it does happen spontaneously. People, young people, children, who people are really open or whatever, however, whatever their body is sensitive, and they get clairvoyant or clairaudient, and they have incredible experiences. And that's just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction. That's just really the most minimal part of what we're talking about here. We're talking about deep seeing, all at once type of seeing, where, for example, if you go on top of a hill and you can see everything down below, you go, oh, I can see the whole valley and all the towns and all the roads and all the cars going around. You can see a whole lot at once. You see, there's a part of awareness that has a really wide lens, you might say, and a really wide frequency perception ability. The question is whether we download that from the subtle perceptions that we get through our daily experience, or do they reach our physical brain, or do they reach... We don't want all that information to come into our physical brain. There's too much information already. That there's certain things that we don't want to know about and see, and smell, and sights and things like that. But there's a subtle realm of perception that gets an overall picture of our existence as we go through our life, so that we're not confused. So you might say what they call the bridge, the antakarana, which is a so-called bridge. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but they call it a bridge between the subconscious, or where our conscious, our daily awareness. I call it the subconscious because it's not very conscious, and that superconscious part of our being that is existence itself, that is that light thread that goes from our subtle being, from that state all the way down through every part of through the atoms, through our physical structure. And that's how telepathy can work. That's how these cosmic experiences can work. That's how we can get the answers. That's how prayer works, because we're not far away from God. It's not like God is way up there and higher than the ethers or whatever, up in the stars, and we gotta like scream really loud, like, "Hey, oh God, can you hear my prayer?" Like, prayer doesn't go very far. It's just really, you don't even need words to pray. We people who know that, like, okay, we don't really need words, and many of the best prayers we can't even put into words. So the main point of this video about transmission through consciousness is an introduction to this big subject. Now, again, I wanted to read from this book here. It tells a little bit about the techniques and the technology, you might say. So I'll give you a moment here. Omnipresent is a law in nature, and based on the fact that the etheric bodies of all forms constitute the world etheric body and makes omniscience possible. All the subhuman forms of life and the human forms are governed by divine thought through the medium of their energy bodies, which are an integral part of the whole. They react, however, unconsciously and unintelligently. So basically that's saying that the energy flows through the cosmos and produces all these beings, and that all that the information is transferring, and it's all oneness. So in a sense, omniscience and omnipresence is a factor of the universe. There's one beingness, and our limited perception and limited understanding makes us feel separate from that. But in certain states of our life, when we're in the womb and we're in a deep meditation or some kind of a crisis happens, we go into that state where there's an absolute freedom and understanding that we're not this body. So I want to read a little bit more from some of these books. There's another book here I talked a little bit about in other videos, the esoteric psychology. It's a thing I'll think of. This is only one volume. There's two of them, and I read them long ago. But I keep referring to them back again because there's so much to try to understand. It just takes a while to grasp this stuff. So I go into a series where, here's another quote here: the dynamic electrical energy of life itself, or the divine potency of embodied purpose, expressing itself through evolutionary manifestation of divine will. that there's basically a powerful emanation that comes from the cosmos, call it God or whatever. It's like this massive oozing, it just constantly creating, assembling, maintaining life. And it's that there's a current of creation that we are integrated in. Our body is part of it. The atoms in our body, they say part of our atoms may come from the stars, or they're just being assembled here. And every 7 years we get a totally new skin and everything. It's just like we're a phantom here. It's a cosmic, fantastic experience. So let me read a little bit more from this book here, The Esoteric Psychology. As a man learns to know himself, he automatically learns to know the quality underlying all appearances, recognizing the notes sounded by all beings and registering the hidden motif of all appearances. So basically, what basically he's saying is that when we know our own being, we are immersed in the fabric of the universe in our consciousness, and we get away from some of the other distractions in our world. And we integrate our consciousness with the universal consciousness, we start to understand all things. There's a saying I love called the rain cloud of knowable things. There's like a mist of knowledge and information that can just flow into our being, is exuding from the universe. It's just coming, it's just out there, the geometry, the electronics, the everything, the gravity, all the stuff is just out there creating constantly, and we're part of it. We forget that. We're just our body, our cells, the heat in our body, the sounds in our body. We're all like totally integrated in this universal substance, you might say. So fortunately, we human beings can get answers to our questions. We don't need to argue. We don't need to depend on books. You see, what happens is books can get abused and so on. There's confusion in interpretation. There's language differences. There's generations go by and the translations are different or whatever. But the essence of the understanding of great sages and souls trying to teach human beings, look, the answers to these cosmic questions are within. You can get them. There's methodology, and it makes you much happier and clearer when you understand some of these things about your own existence. And it's not difficult. It's not going to be something we can argue about. We have to have our own personal interior understanding through meditation and contemplation, and just being silent internally so that we can get the downloads. You know, the movement of the information has to come to in our being, and just what it basically does is we have a little memory, a little mind, and little concepts of life. It filters out things, filters out what we are trained to filter out, basically in our society. But there's another part of our being that we have a hunger and a deep thirst, really, from the time we're little, just to understand. I want to open up the entire channel. I want to know the Creator. I want to know that incredible experience within. I want to feel it every single day. And it can't be a theory. So ultimately, getting back to the idea of telepathy is really where communication, I mean, is it the communication with God? Is that telepathy? I mean, there's some kind of communication that we can initiate, and we can also receive into and back and forth through the cosmic consciousness. And that's because we're a human being and we have this technology. Is that there's other beings, other kinds of creatures, like some animals, they have a really great way of relating to their environment, and that's the gift the Creator brings to that particular being, okay? And they have hooves and things that they can use and big teeth to eat things, and they have all the right technology for their life. Human beings have a technology available to us that has to do with exploring our consciousness. And meditation is something it's a word that is overused and confused, but we're talking about basically a silence of perception, a stillness of perception that gets to a point where there's non-duality and non-locality. And it's not that far away from all of our experiences. Many times, human beings, we go through our life, there's certain things that happen in our life, and sometimes we just like get snapped into an incredible experience. Because it's our nature, you see. Now, what these books talk about, and some of these other great teachers are saying that, it's a lot more available to us, and there's certain technology, there's things we need to learn about it. That's all. It's just getting aware. So let me see if I can find a couple more quotes here before I get more detail here. But I've talked a lot about resonance, resonant frequencies. We turn our mind, let's say, when in radio, when there's a resonance, there's a pulse, you see, when we get aligned, that's what chakra alignment or meditation, aligning our body, aligning our mind or awareness with just basically stillness, you see. So this is kind of like the elevator, let's say you want to go up the 100th floor in an elevator. Well, the first part, you got to actually get in the elevator. After that, it's pretty easy, you see. So you just push a couple of buttons and you're up there. So our awareness, we just take the step to be within and go in the inner elevator and just sit there for a while, and you'll get to places in awareness that you never even dreamed. And then you can bring them back in. Now, many people use dreams. I've never been active in dream life because I don't dream very much, but I've had some very powerful dreams in my life. But dreams are one area. There's a whole area of in this book, The Light of the Soul, Esoteric Psychology, there's so many techniques, there's so many techniques that are available and descriptions of how to align the mind, how to rest, and what kind of observation you can have with the states of mind and awareness, so that at some point, when, like this pencil, I'm holding this pencil, like there's a part of our being, our will, that holds the mind just like a tool. The mind is not like something that just runs away like a jackhammer, there's things that we can do to harness our mind and make it like a laser and make it one-pointed, so that, for example, when you do a detailed writing or study, or if you're an artist, or you do some very detailed activity requires manual dexterity, like soldering or something, well, you practice and you train and you really get really focused, and you just for 5 minutes, I got to do this one thing, I got to make this brush stroke here, or I got to do something, but you focus. So handling our mind and our senses is kind of like, okay, we have 5 senses. Like if you focus these 5 senses for a little while, they don't always have to be focused, because there's things we can entertain and we can get focused on one particular sense. But if you want to get certain types of tasks done, you focus all your senses into one oversense, you might say, the 6th sense, the mind, the intellect, we call the bowl that contains all the other senses, the consciousness. You get that unified consciousness within yourself that is the owner operator of these senses, you might say, and you start using that like a laser beam to explore within and to get insight on certain things. And there's certain kind of focuses that people can get into, like when they're psychics, they can hold an object, for example. They pick up an object and say, well, I feel this object, and I know who held it before. I can get images of where it's been and all these kinds of things. There's people who can do that kind of stuff, okay? It's not really that uncommon, and there's a lot of us that get that kind of feeling when we don't even realize it. We walk into a place and you feel like, okay, well, that's a little weird vibe. I'm not really sure what it is, but, we get these feelings, okay? So there are senses that we get into that we are not really conscious of, but if we just explore them in a little more detail, we realize, well, I can use that particular sensitivity in my consciousness to add something to my life, or maybe learn something new, and so on. So I don't want to make these videos too long, so you see I've gone about 25 minutes. Uh, I love to hear the feedback. I know I don't have a huge following, but I get really into some of this stuff because perception is all we got. It's a little thread that we have to get through this life, and we better use it carefully, and then we can get really excited about some of the things that we explore. So I hope to see you in some of my other videos. I have a lot of books here. I didn't get to all the quotes I wanted to get in this particular video, but I'll make some more. And I'd love to hear the feedback about conversation about what kind of experience have you had, and you know, what kinds of out of body or telepathy kinds of experiences, what kind of dreams you've had, and so on, because it's a very, very fascinating thing to explore our own awareness. So thanks again. Please like and share. Hope to see you in some of my other videos.